I once interviewed Tom Keifer of the band Cinderella. And I asked Tom Keifer about grunge music and Nirvana and Kurt Cobain and that whole scene that came along that destroyed the 80s metal scene that Tom Keifer was associated with. And Tom Keifer responded to that question in a way that surprised me and stays with me to this very day, kids. And I'll tell you more about it on the other side. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. Have to believe we are magic. Nothing can stand in our way. Do you know that one, kids? Do you know that tune? Now stand down, Spotify. Stand aside, YouTube. No reason to get upset. That was just me singing. That was not the actual recording of the tune Magic by Olivia Newton John, 1980. No need to come after your boy for some sort of copyright violation, okay? It was just me, not Olivia Newton John. But we've been talking about formative music, kids, over the last little while. We talked about Joan Jett. And we talked about Loverboy, and we talked about Edison Lighthouse, Love Girls Where My Rosemary Goes. We talked about a lot of the music that formed the basis of me as a music lover, as a musician, as a person, man, because it all ties together. And one of my favorite songs that I have not told you about yet is Magic by Olivia Newton John. Do you know that one? That was 1980, kids. Now, that tune was recorded for the movie Xanadu. I'm not a big movie guy. I have not seen Xanadu, but those of you who are movie trivia buffs might want to know that the movie Xanadu, released 1980, was one of the inspirations for the Golden Raspberry Awards. The Razzies, kids! Everyone's celebration of the worst in movies for the year, and one of the two movies that inspired that celebration was Xanadu. So in addition to giving us a really great trivia question, and if you're one of those people out there who really digs on bad movies, and those people exist, there are people who have built their lives around knowing everything they can about the worst movies that have ever been made. And if they listen to this show, then they probably know about Xanadu. So Xanadu gave us that, gave us a trivia question, gave us the simple pleasure of a bad movie for those who are into that kind of thing, and gave us the tune Magic by Olivia Newton John. And I love that tune, man. Now I'm trying to remember where I encountered it first, and my guess is that I was driving to play an exhibition hockey game somewhere. And that came out in 1980, spent 4 weeks, kids, at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Magic by Olivia Newton John. So let's say I was 7 or 8 years old, maybe 9. Driving somewhere with my dad at 7:30 in the morning to play a hockey match. Now, I was not a good hockey player. I was an okay hockey player. I'm an okay athlete, statistically average. Didn't have the killer instinct, you know what I mean? Never played for a travel team or anything like that. Didn't really have that sort of competitiveness in me. And I felt bad about that throughout times in my life, but I don't care today. But we used to set up, exhibition matches with teams in other parts of the territory. And it seems to me that I was driving to one of those matches at some point in time. And this tune, Magic, came on the radio. That's the context in which I'm hearing it. Could be wrong, but it stuck with me even as a kid because there's a weird kind of creepy vibe happening on this tune. And it's kind of a disco song. It was 1980, recorded in 1979. So there's a disco vibe and it's kind of creepy, but then it's got this chorus, man. Got to believe we are magic. It's like I don't know, man. It's dark and vibey. Olivia Newton John doing what Olivia Newton John used to do, you know. And that is one of the formative tunes for me, man. And you will find it on the John Huff Podcast, referenced on the pod playlist on Spotify. I will put it there. So if you ain't heard it, you can go check it out. And I love that tune. And it's been on my mind because we've been thinking about and talking about the formative music. That one's been bouncing around in my head, and it kind of came out this week, and it was timely, kids. Now check the lyrics on this tune, man. Probably it has something to do with, the Xanadu movie. I'm going to guess it's of some relevance to whatever's going on in what was a raspberry-inspiring movie. But check this out, man. Come take my hand. You should know me. I've always been in your mind. You know that I'll be kind. I'll be guiding you. This is spiritual stuff, man. You have to believe we are magic. Nothing can stand in our way. You have to believe we are magic, kids. Don't let your aim ever stray, and if all your hopes survive, your destiny will arrive. I'll bring your dreams alive for you, yeah. And ain't that what we need right now, man? Don't we all need just a little taste, just a little boost, man? Just a little sip of it's gonna be okay. You have to believe we are magic. And that was relevant to me this week, man, because Mr. Underemployed Drummer, feeling ever so slightly like a heck of a 47-year-old loser these days. I was down in the old jam space, out shedding. Drummers say shedding. That's practicing in the woodshed, man. And I thought I'd have a little fun, I thought I'd put on some of the old tunes I used to play to. Now, when I was coming up as a drummer, didn't know what I was doing, okay? I grew up in a small town. I found out later there were drum lessons available. At the time, I didn't really know that. I didn't really get that was a thing, right? I took piano lessons, and that's a whole other thing for my therapist. Never took the drum lessons, I kind of, like a lot of people, I picked up the drums by playing along with music, man. And what I used to play along with, since it was the late 80s, was the 80s rock, man, the metal. I was a metalhead as a kid, and I played the metal drums, man, because that's all I knew. And I had like the double kick, and I had a 7-piece drum kit going with it, man. Like back in those days, the 80s, it was like the drum set was part of the show, man, at least in the metal world. So you had to have like a big drum set. Didn't matter the make or manner of those drums. Just needed to be big, man. And the measure of your drums was quite a physical measurement, right? So you could have the most Superfly hot, 4-piece DW kit that cost an arm and a leg. But you'd rather have the 7-piece Westbury kit that I had with the double kick pedal because that's metal, man, and it's part of the show. And you get older and you grow up and you mature and you start playing gigs and you realize carrying that 4-piece or even a 3 beats the crap out of carrying a 7. You know what I'm saying, kids? It's a matter of economy, all right? And your 7-piece probably doesn't fit in the van. So I have matured my way into a 4-piece drum kit and a 3 if I can get away with it. And there are times that I just play kick snare, and that, for me, is bliss. But I went back and I started playing some of the old music from back in the day, And I was playing along with this record by a Christian band called Saint. Do you know Saint? A lot of you guys and girls who are listening here are becoming just a little bit, at least intrigued, if not fascinated, by the Christian music world in which I grew up. And there's an interesting story in kind of the early to mid 80s of the Christian music world because the metal began to arrive, okay? You'll find in Christian music that whatever is hot in the public consciousness becomes hot in the Christian consciousness too. Kids are kids, man. What's popular is what's popular, And so the metal started happening. We've talked about this, early 80s, it sort of began to happen, and the Christian scene followed along, And there were hard rock bands happening. There's Res Band, which I've talked about, the Resurrection Band. Go check out the Between Heaven and Hell record. And they were around like late 70s, early 80s. And there was a band called Barnabas that actually released a couple of dang great records, if I'm honest. The problem that a lot of the Christian bands had in the early to mid 80s was production, okay? Now, they were getting signed to kind of small-time Christian record labels, but small-time labels mean small-time budgets, you know what I mean? And so the production suffered on a lot of these kind of pioneering early Christian metal records, all right? Now, you can listen to Stryper's Yellow and Black Attack EP, all right? And you'll say, production's pretty good on that. And yeah, it is, because they were not really part of the Christian world. They were in the secular world with kind of secular budgets, and their music always just a little bit, particularly in the early days, sits apart from some of the others, all right? But I'm talking the pioneering early 80s, mid 80s Christian metal, the white metal bands. What does that mean? Bloodgood, Barren Cross, Messiah Prophet, Saint, who I mentioned. There are others. There are a bunch of them out there, you know. Bride came along. And the early work by some of these bands, a little bit weak on the production side, because I think a little bit weak on the budget side, man. And so the early music from that scene suffers a bit from that. And so when I talk to you about Saint's album Time's End, which I think was 1986, you have to forgive just a little bit the production, but there is just a little bit of magic in that album, man. There is something about it. You know, in a lot of cases, the music wasn't great on these records either. So you get the double whammy of poor production and not great music. Something in this Saint record was cool, though, man. There are a couple of really killer tunes on there. The album opener, In the Night, and this tune, Steel Killer. This is what do I say? I would talk, there's a whole like podcast series in this music, all right, and in this scene. But a lot of the early Christian metal stuff was pretty over the head with Armageddon. Was pretty over the top, over the head with Revelation, with the end of the world, with the rapture, with a lot of this stuff, man, because where does the metal imagery fit, right? Where does it come from? You know, you listen to your Dio records, your Iron Maiden records or whatever, you know, this sort of dark, demonic imagery. Well, that's, you know, that's all over the Bible, man. It's in there. Where do you think that stuff comes from? So it's no surprise then that the metal bands jumped onto this sort of dark, demonic, end of times, rapture kind of theme, I guess, for some of their lyrics. And, you know, ostensibly, these bands were coming into the world to save souls, man, and that's the message. It's about fire insurance. It's about not going to hell, man. It's about being saved. So let's come at you with, here's what's going to happen in the world, kids. There's going to be a rapture, and some pretty freaky-looking beasts are going to come out of the sea, and they're going to eat people, all right? So you might want to get your fire insurance intact. So Time's End is kind of about that, all right? It's a record about the end times, Time's End. And you don't care about that. And if you're into metal, you probably won't even notice a difference lyrically. It's, you know, it could fit on any sort of dark, evil kind of mid-80s metal album. It's about the end times, but there's a couple of really great tunes on this record, man. Steel Killer is just an awesome tune, and there's a cool guitar tone. I don't know, man. It's a cheaply produced record, but something about it works, and I always liked that record by Saint, you know? And so I was listening to it this week. It brings back the memories, warms the cockles, man. We're all in a time right now where warm cockles are kind of at a premium, all right? COVID's getting people down, and it can help to go back, as I've said, listen to the music of your youth. So I went back and I listened to Time's End, and I'm playing along with it, you know? And I'm realizing I'm not doing too good, man. Now, I've become something of a specialist in singer-songwriter music, all right? That's kind of my pocket. That's kind of my jam, and the singer-songwriter stuff tends to be a little more delicate, a little slower, little less demanding physically. Playing metal is physically freaking demanding. If you have good technique, you can develop an economy of technique. You can get your way through a show and you can play super fast because you know how to use bounce and you know how to use your pedals properly. I told you, I didn't learn any of that stuff. I just sort of set myself behind the drum kit and started banging away to MSG tunes and Dawkins tunes, and Saint and Bloodgood. And I don't play double kick anymore, so that part of the game is gone, right? So I'm ill-equipped for what I'm sitting down to play. And it should have been fun, and it was, at certain points. And it's interesting what you remember, because I haven't paid close attention to this record in a very, 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 very long time. And then a fill would just come out of me that was like, that's what's on the record. It's like it's latent. It's like, what is hidden in our subconscious, Those dusty memories back there. Who knows, man? That's why we go to hypnosis. And I'm waiting for somebody to hypnotize me properly and unleash all that stuff. I was playing along to a Queensryche album. I was playing along to Empire at one point recently. Same thing. It's just like stuff came out of me. It's like, I didn't even know I knew that. But that's the lick. That's the fill. Whatever. It's cool. I'm no Scott Rockenfeld by a long shot. But it's cool when that happens. And it was kind of fun. But then it's like, dude, I'm not keeping up. It's like my hands won't do it. My foot won't do it. It's like I'm missing that fill. And it became really kind of depressing, actually. To be faced once again with my own frailties. Now, I have worked on it, all right? I did eventually start taking lessons when I took a 10-year hiatus from drumming because I was going to school, and then I was living in apartments, and then I was married, and then I was working, and it was like, there was no room for drumming. I picked it up again, and I immediately started taking lessons. So I started to develop some technique, or at least some sense of understanding technique. I still ain't good at it. And, it is what it is, but I'm playing along to this music and it's like not really working. It's a little bit fun, but I'm not doing well. And it brings me down because I am a serial self-doubter, okay? It's part of the message and the impetus of this podcast. It's like you can get over your self-doubts and you can do your thing, man. It's all on the other side of your fear. But the self-doubts come into me hard, dude, and they come fast, particularly in the area of drumming. And here's a hot tip, all right? If you're feeling an intense amount of self-doubt about a particular thing, chances are that thing really matters to you, okay? One of the reasons that I haven't really been able to write for a long time creatively is that it matters so freaking much to me that I kill it. You know what I mean? You kill your children that way. And with the drumming, it's like the self-doubt pops up right away because, A, I know I have weaknesses, all right? And I'm super self-conscious about those. And though I work on them, with technique developed long after my limbs started to go brittle. You learn this technique when you're 8, okay? You're malleable and your hands are like liquid. That's when you develop technique, okay? Not when you're 32 or something like that and you're like, and you've been in the gym for 15 years and you're like just a club. You're just a club walking around, So it hurt me. It set me back, all right? I'm trying to develop this and, as I said, it is what it is. But I'm a serial self-doubter, okay? That's S-E-R-I-A-L, by the way, not a serial C-E-R-E-A-L self-doubter. I'm not sure what that would be. Someone who feels like he really just can't get through a bowl of cereal? I'm not sure. Or someone who's like an athlete and thinks he'll never make it to the cover of a Wheaties box. I am a serial self-doubter, but you can do it, man. You have to believe you are magic. So it started bringing me down, man, that I could not play this music very well. And maybe with some practice, I could. But, my vein, my jive, my groove, my area is kind of this singer-songwriter world right now. And so the music that I'm playing is slower. And the music I'm playing requires a different kind of dynamics, a different kind of sensitivity. And it's fun to develop that too. But then you sit down to try and play some banging tune off of Saint's Time's End album and you can't really do it, and that brings you down. And then if you're me, right off the bat, it comes in at you. You're a crap drummer, dude. What are you doing out here? Like, stop. Just quit even talking about drums because you have no right to that conversation. And yes, somehow you've toured with people, but we all know the shoe's gonna drop, right? Like, we all know they're going to find out that you don't know what you're doing and you can't play some of the stuff on Saints Times End album, let alone those Believer records that I like so much. If you're into technical thrash metal, like fast, heavy, the way it used to be, man, early 90s, go listen to Believer's Sanity Obscure record. And the Dimensions record is like prog thrash. It's almost inscrutable. It's a genius record. You know, I've gone on record before as saying I think that the best Christian metal band of them all was Believer, all right? That's a bold freaking statement, but you go listen to Sanity Obscure and you realize there's something going on with this band. Unless you don't like thrash metal, in which case you're going to hate Believer. But, you know, that's what I'm saying. Believer was the band. And they disappeared for a long time, and then they came back in the, like around 09, 10, something like that. And they came back as more of like a kind of a prog metal band, not nearly as thrashy. And they dropped 2 records, Gabriel, which is a little bit thrashy, but mostly kind of prog. And the, you know, the throat full of glass vocals disappeared and Kurt Bachman started singing, which was quite a shock to the system for Believer fans. Then they released a record called Transhuman, which is just, these are really good records, man, but they are not thrash, okay? Different thing. Believer's a great band, and you should check out Believer, all right? Where was I going with that? I got sidetracked. Really good comedians get sidetracked and then somehow find their way back an hour later, and the audience, you know, stands up and applauds. I don't think anybody's standing up and applauding here today. Anyways, I couldn't play some of the stuff on the Saint record, and it brought me down, and it made me feel bad about myself, you know? And you got to be careful about that, kids, all right? Because there's always going to be a thing that'll get you down. And if, like me, you're in kind of a fragile state of mind these days, if you're a serial self-deprecator anyways, S-E-R-I-A-L, you know, you're always kind of vulnerable to your thoughts pulling you down, man. And then you bugger something up like that, or you feel like you didn't do well, and then the voice just kind of comes in, you know, the voice that's always with you, kind of always biting at you, that says you're not good enough and you can't do this and you're a fraud. If you don't have that voice, I applaud you, and I would like your advice on how to get rid of it. But it came up for me this week, and I had to remind myself that there are things that I do well, okay? You know, there are things that I play well, there's music that I like to play that I play well, and as much as I love the metal, and I am a metal person at heart, I might not be a metal drummer, you know? Not everything is everyone. There's some terrific metal drummers out there who probably can't play a jazz tune all that well. And then there are drummers out there who are the very creme de la creme, the true giants of the game, the true people to aspire to who can play freaking anything. Vinny Colaiuta, hats off to those guys. I ain't ever going to be one. Sometimes you have to accept that, but you know, you narrow your focus onto what you can do well. And what I can do well a lot of the time is play some of that singer-songwriter stuff. And so, you know, my effort needs to go to honing my ability and being able to do what that kind of music demands. But I'm feeling down about it, and then I'm thinking about formative music, and up comes Magic by Olivia Newton John. You have to believe we are magic. Nothing can stand in our way. You have to believe we are magic. Don't let your aim ever stray. And if your hopes survive, your destiny will arrive. I'll bring all your dreams alive for you. Now that is a call to trust yourself, to trust your higher self, to trust whatever thing it is, man, that exists in this universe, whatever energy it is that is above and in and throughout it all. And I'm working really hard at believing in that and following that. And it was a cool reminder in this moment of self-doubt, thinking to myself, I can't go any further than I've gone in music. Like, it just doesn't seem possible to me. With my level of ability and with the opportunities that exist around me, it just doesn't seem like it can happen, man. Quite apart from COVID, you know, destroying the music industry entirely. It's like it doesn't seem possible, but you have to believe we are magic. You have to believe that we can attract, find, discover, place ourselves in that perfect situation. There is someone out there, maybe multiple people out there, for whom I am just the right player. I get it, I can play it, I can do it, I contribute to it what it needs, and you have to believe we are magic. You have to believe that with a bit of faith, with a lot of effort, with a lot of hope, that can come together. And it's not just music, it's a job, it's a relationship, it's whatever you're looking for in the world, man. You have to believe you are magic. And what is the magic? It is that connection to spirit. It is that connection to your higher self. It is that connection to the goodness in you and the hope in you and the faith in you that moves the mountains, kids, and brings it all together. And yeah, you can find yourself in exactly the right situation for you. But you have to believe you're magic, you know what I mean? Right, the Tom Keifer thing. You weren't expecting that, were you? Weren't expecting me to pull you in and then make you sit through all of that. That's a teaser, man. That's what it's all about. The Tom Keifer thing. Yes, I interviewed Tom. By the way, I hope this is sounding okay because we are in uncharted territory here, all right? Because I'm recording this episode in an entirely different way than I have done in the past. Because there was something going on. I was hearing this. I don't know if this was coming through on your end when you were listening to these episodes. But there was something happening whereby the audio was warbling when I listened to it back, It made me sound like I was underwater. I don't know if you guys heard that or not. But I was hearing it, and it was making me freaking crazy. So I'm trying a different recording setup to see if a particular piece of my other recording setup was the problem. Now, I also spilled cranberry juice on my computer some time ago, and I'm wondering if that is affecting audio output in some way. It's never a good thing to do, man. The silver lining, there's always a silver lining. Look for the silver linings, kids. Is that my computer is not going to get a urinary tract infection. I don't know if there's like the equivalent of a urinary virus that can come through, but it's got the cranberry juice all over it, so that ain't gonna happen. So I hope this is sounding okay, and if it's not sounding normal to you, that's the reason why, man. We're trying a different system. Tom Keifer. I interviewed Tom Keifer for the London Groove Machine blog. He had just released his first solo record. He was coming to town to play here, and so that's what I used to do a lot of the time, is if I wanted an interview with anybody, I would kind of look to see who was coming to town. And if you're a local blogger, that's a way to do it because they're always looking for a chance to plug their show, And sometimes you may find yourself talking on the phone with one of your heroes, freaking Tom Keifer, you know what I mean? So we talked about grunge coming along and destroying the metal scene. Now I have to take another aside here because our good friend Jay took issue with my use of the word hair metal on a couple of recent episodes. Not something I've talked about, but he's right when he says that there is a certain amount of derision in that term, and it's a bit condescending. And in fact, the word hair metal, the term hair metal, was not really in vogue until after that scene was over. And it was kind of a derogatory term coined by critics, coined by grunge people, to sort of put down the hard rock of the 80s. And even, back in the day, it was referred to mostly as glam, glam metal. And so, yeah, I don't know when I started using the word hair metal. It just became part of the popular vernacular. But now you know the rest of the story. So apparently that's a derogatory thing to say, and if I have upset anybody of the genre, I do apologize. I am your biggest fan. Because it does, in a certain sense, undercut the incredible musicianship and the great tunes that those bands wrote. And one of the problems, one of the reasons that you don't hear a lot of that music on the radio, it's like classic rock skips right back to 1982, might catch Shout at the Devil, might play a Def Leppard song, and might play Guns N' Roses, and that's pretty much it. And then it goes like 70s, 60s back. It skips what for 10 years was the dominant form of rock music in the world, all because they had hair. Apparently. So that bothers me because a lot of that music is killer, and a lot of it is way better than what came after it in the 90s and the 2000s. Fight me. And it bothers me, and if I'm contributing to that problem, I do apologize. 80s hard rock, 80s metal, glam metal, if you like. I asked Tom Keifer, dude, what were you thinking? 92, 93, when the grunge came and Nirvana came, and it killed that whole scene and effectively killed Cinderella and countless other bands that were the chart toppers of the era. And Tom Keifer said something that really surprised me, kids. He said, you know what? I just looked at Kurt's songs as rock songs, man. You know, big guitars, riffs, big choruses, they were rock songs, and that was it. And it blew my freaking mind, man. That he just said Kurt. And I should have followed up. Like, dude, did you know him? Maybe he did. Maybe he did. I don't know. Next time I interview Tom, I'll ask him, And I thought that was a very open, non-judgmental, non-defensive way to look at it. It's all just music, man. And as a King's X fan, I should know better. Because people have been, having trouble pigeonholing King's X since the day they appeared on the scene. Go listen to the Out of the Silent Planet record, please. Just put on your freaking headphones, sit in the dark, and listen to that record front to back. All right? Just do me that favor. Just do me that favor. And so now, like 7 years later, maybe, since I interviewed Tom Keifer, it springs to mind, all right? Because we're about to spin the latest Stone Temple Pilots record. Now, one of the things I wanted to do with this segment is listen to some music that I wouldn't normally listen to, okay? Now, Black Swan, chances are I was going to get to them sooner or later, but the Gregory Alan Isaacoff was not on my radar, The Paul McCartney record was not on my radar at all, And now we come to Stone Temple Pilots. And you can see for somebody like me who came from the glam metal world that was destroyed by the grunge to now be confronting a record by what I'm going to call one of the big four of grunge. The big four of thrash, right? Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, Slayer. That was the big four of thrash. These guys, these bands at the top of the thrash pantheon. For the record, Megadeth's number one for me, okay? There was a big four in my mind of grunge. They were Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and Stone Temple Pilots, all right? Now, Alice in Chains occupies a weird space between. Dave Matthews wrote a song about Alice in Chains called The Space Between. And for some reason, the metal community embraced Alice in Chains, even though they were not really part of the metal community, okay? For whatever reason, we were cool with Alice in Chains. And still are, by the way. So I don't put them in the big four of grunge because I feel like they occupy some other space. But Stone Temple Pilots, I'm putting in the big four of grunge, Should be my musical enemy. And were for a long time after Sex Type Thing. All right. Now, I was around when the fault line occurred. All right. I was there when the fault line broke open between the glam metal ending and the grunge beginning. Right. I can remember at the football game in high school when they were pumping you up. They played Enter Sandman. They played Smells Like Teen Spirit. Worlds were colliding. When I was in my first year of university, down at the University of Windsor for that first year, and then got out of there as fast as I could. Spent a lot of time listening to the Z-Rock, man, and that's where I first heard Stone Temple Pilots, okay? Now, Nirvana was out by then. Nirvana had broken huge, right? The glam scene hadn't been destroyed yet, but it was on its last legs. Pearl Jam's first record was out, so people were listening to that. Cool people were. And turning up their nose at Firehouse, you know what I mean? And then on the radio, you would hear Sex Type Thing, which was a banging tune, man. I had no issue at all with Stone Temple Pilots when I heard Sex Type Thing. Banger, great tune. And then after it, on Z-Rock, Detroit, they would play Jackal, Down on Me or When Will It Rain, something like that, or Guns N' Roses tune. The world's, the fault line was opening up there. And I thought, I like this band, Stone Temple Pilots. That's pretty cool. And I was okay with Going Hungry. I was okay with Temple of the Dog, you know? It was happening. It was happening at that point, but then my scene still existed. You could still go across to Ford Field or whatever was over there, and the Silver Dome was over there in those days. You could still go over there and catch like a Motley Crue show or something like that. It was still happening, right? They play Jackal, they play Sex Type thing, and I was okay with that, but then they lost me, and then my scene died, and, you know, the other stuff came along, like the Vaseline and whatever. Didn't really do it for me. And I started to develop kind of a chip on my shoulder about the grunge because all the bands that I loved so much, Saint, were gone, man. And then it was this music, and I wasn't into this music. This was the kids' music. And then I disappeared from music altogether in the 90s. You know, I kept buying King's X records, and I kept buying Galactic Cowboys records, and I bought Face to Face records and Archers of Loaf records, neither of whom are metal bands, but I don't know, I let that slide. They weren't grunge bands either. I developed a kind of wall between me and the grunge, man. And now, as a mature adult, I'm coming back and I'm saying, okay, let's listen to some music I would not normally listen to, and Stone Temple Pilots absolutely qualifies as one of the big four of grunge, all right? So when I'm sitting down to listen to this record, Perdida, the latest Stone Temple Pilots album, the words of Tom Keifer ring in my ears, all right? I just thought they were rock songs. Dude, approach this as listening to rock songs. Just treat them as rock songs. Leave your political baggage. Leave your childish notions behind. We're all adults here now. We can accept good music as good music, bad music as bad music, without passing a kind of public judgment, all right? So I approached this Stone Temple Pilots record, Perdida, with the words of Tom Keifer in my ears. I just thought they were rock songs. Dude, treat them as rock songs. See what you think. And as it turned out, while that is a mature and generous approach, it was the wrong one, because these aren't rock songs, dude. The new Stone Temple Pilots record, Perdida, I'm going to say, is really great. I like it a lot, but it is not a rock record, so it threw me for a bit of a loop. This is, and I didn't know it going in, you know, the object when I go into these records, okay, is not to know anything about them, to know as little as possible. I want to take the music on its own merit. Again, got to drop my baggage, you know? You can't approach a Paul McCartney record as a Beatle fan, you know? You've got to sort of take it as it is, right? And so I didn't look into the background of this record. I just hit play and started listening. And what happened was acoustics. It's an acoustic album, man. And I'm like, whoa, that's an interesting idea. It surprised me a little. I was expecting, you know, a plugged-in Stone Temple Pilots rock album that I was going to let be a rock album. But this one surprised me, man. And so I listened to it, and I listened to it again, and then I'm like, okay, now let's do a little bit of reading into this record. And then I find out, yeah, they set out to do an acoustic thing. Was not expecting that, okay? So Tom Keifer's advice, I will keep in my back pocket. And it's good for you to keep in yours, by the way, if you have genre prejudices, which I'm getting over. I'm getting better at. Getting spiritual, man. Learning to accept what is. But I like this album. I'm going to come straight out and say I like this record by Stone Temple Pilots, Perdida. But you don't need to take my word for it. You probably want to take the word of a fan. And so I went to the biggest Stone Temple Pilots fan that I know, and that's our old friend Ken the Zen. And so I said, hey, Ken the Zen, what's your take on the new Stone Temple Pilots record? He says, I listened to it. It's awesome with 3 exclamation points, kids. Now, if you know Ken the Zen, he's not an exclamation point kind of guy. He's zen. He's chill. You know? Plays bass, bounces up and down, doesn't make a spectacle of himself. Not a big exclamation point guy. He dropped 3 on the Stone Temple Pilots record, and this guy is a fan, okay? Ken the Zen is a few years younger than me. His scene was the Nirvana and up grunge scene, okay? Dude comes out of this space. In much the same way that I'm qualified to have an opinion on the Black Swan stuff, Ken the Zen is qualified to have a position on Stone Temple Pilots, all right? He says awesome. He says, I always thought of them as a modern-day Zeppelin. Whoa! Not in sound, but in progression. Now that's interesting. Now I have not gone back and listened to all of the records that have happened since Sex Type Thing, all right? I've covered some of the songs, all right? I've played them. I know Interstate Love Song and all that stuff. I know the radio songs. You can't get away from them, all right? But I haven't really listened to the records, and apparently this Stone Temple Pilots is a band that bounces around quite a bit. There's a lot of musical depth to this band, and it shows on this record, Perdida, okay? And Ken the Sound goes on to say, they are an awesome band, so underrated. I am super glad they are still making music. People think they are a grunge band, not even close. And hey, I am inclined to believe Ken the Zen because Ken the Zen knows what he's talking about, particularly when it comes to your Stone Temple Pilots. He's also the host of a trivia show called the Music Trivia League, of which I am co-host, and you can see that on the YouTube. Shameless plug. So let's get to the record, okay? It is an acoustic album, and I recorded with mostly traditional instruments. It is super chill. It is very vibey. It's got just like a laid-back thing. It's an acoustic record, man. I know that can mean different things, all right? I know that Great Big Sea can do an acoustic record, and you're tapping your toes the whole dang time. It is not one of those. It begins with a tune called Fare Thee Well. And it surprises you if you don't know what's coming. And it's just this lush acoustic tune, man. There's not a lot happening for the drummer. There's a lot of cool percussion happening on this record. You know, there's a lot of sounds. Like, again, it's like the Black Swan record. A lot of thought went into this. A lot of thought went into the production. A lot of thought went into creating the mood, which is very just chill and a little bit dark. A little bit earnest, you know? Not Ernest Goes to Camp, earnest. And a lot of thought went into that. And percussion is a big part of it, man. And there's keyboards happening throughout this record, and there's strings happening throughout this record. Some sounds you don't expect. There's percussion going on. Not a lot of backbeat happening, you know, but what I thought when I listened to this first tune fairly well is it sounded like the Eagles to me. I feel like there's a 70s kind of vibe running through this record, you know? I picture 70s coffee house kind of thing. It's pretty hard for me. I was around in the 70s, but I don't really remember, you know? I wasn't cataloging the culture at that point in time. Feels like a 70s record to me, and Fare Thee Well feels like an Eagles tune, if that gives you any kind of reference. There are just some really cool harmonies on it. There are cool harmonies on this chorus. I don't know if they do them live. I meant to check out some live to see if STP does the harmonies, because I got a thing about bands that do harmonies on albums and not live. That drives me crazy. And I'll tell you another thing. I'm not an acoustic record kind of guy, all right? I'm not an acoustic versions of rock songs kind of guy. That's one of my big annoyances. When all those acoustic albums were coming out, early 90s, you know, the unplugged craze, that drove me freaking nuts. Rock songs are meant to be freaking rock songs, all right? What makes them rock songs is the energy that comes through in them. And for me, that just gets lost on the acoustic versions and it drives me crazy. But this is not one of those. This was set out to be an acoustic record, written acoustically to be recorded acoustically, and that's okay. I know it's not like me to have an opinion. I know that's new territory for me, but hey, COVID, new recording setup, it's all going out the window, kids. Then we get to this tune, 3 Wishes. And here's what I said about that. 3 Wishes sounds to me like a tune that would be on a Queensryche album that disappointed you. That is not an insult, all right? That is not me being, sort of clever and snarky. Queensryche did this, you know, particularly in the early 90s. They got just a little bit more proggy. Like they did Mindcrime and they did Empire, and those were metal albums, rock albums, very polished, very commercial, but they were like rock albums. And then after that, Promised Land came, right? And it had a much less hard edge, a much softer edge to it. Great record, some really cool songs on it. And I like that album, but it disappointed you if you were a teenager and you were used to Queensryche rocking hard. That album did not rock hard, but this song could have been on it because it's got a Queensrychian kind of chord progression, a Queensrychian kind of feel to it, just a little bit angular. I know I use that term a lot, but it's what works for me with some of the way the chords work. And I could hear Jeff Tate singing it. back in the day. It had a Queensryche vibe on one of those Queensryche albums that disappointed you because it wasn't heavy. That doesn't mean the songs weren't good, right? And this is a good song too. I like it. There's a nice plugged-in guitar lead happening on it. Very cool, but it sits way back in it's like an echo. It's kind of floating above the tune, the lead guitar. And Queensryche would do that sort of thing too, and that's a vibe thing. That is a play at a vibe, and it's cool and it works. Then the title track, Perdida, which has like a Spanish guitar vibe, it's, what I wrote down was, it sounds like a tune that would run behind the credits of a 1970s martial arts movie. Is this doing anything for you, man? Is this giving you any sort of vibe on what I'm talking about here? Can you picture like a dude in the desert and it's all over and he's walking down the highway, right? And there's cactuses and the sun and like an acoustic Spanish sort of guitar song playing, Probably wasn't a great movie. That's the vibe I get from this tune, okay? And it's cool and I like it. It's evocative, man. That's a silly comparison, but I hope it evokes kind of a flavor for you. Cool song, I like it. Then, I Didn't Know the Time has flute in it, man. Stone Temple Pilots, I Didn't Know the Time, has a flute solo, has flute running through it. All right, this is what I'm talking about. And that could be like a Jethro Tull thing, right? That could be like a 70s thing. It's got a 70s kind of vibe, man. I thought it sounded almost like Gordon Lightfoot, right? Stone Temple Pilots we're talking about here. Tom Keifer didn't see that coming, man. Tom Keifer didn't see flute solos coming. And Stone Temple Pilots tunes that sound like Gordon Lightfoot to me, all right? But I like it. It's cool. And then there's like a flute outro. This is not really a driving record, Listening application, probably smoke a bowl. That's my guess. Just saying. It's like Gordon Lightfoot back when Gordo was Gordo. Gordo from the 70s, man. Gordo from the 70s meant freaking business, dude. And that vibe comes through on this tune. Then there's a tune called Years. And as soon as it started, I thought to myself, yeah, man, I'm going to like this. Because again, it's got this 70s kind of feel, man. And there's some keyboards happening, but it's like super restrained, feels like it would be in the background, maybe at a restaurant, but it's got this vibe. And what I'm noticing about all these records that we're talking about on the Spinnin' segment have a vibe about them, man. And the vibes aren't all the same, right? But there is a vibe infused in the record, and that's an intangible, but it's important. And there's a vibe on this one. Again, it's got this kind of 70s flavor to me. And again, there's a flute. How are you going to argue with a flute, man, on a Stone Temple Pilots record? You know what I'm saying? Maybe there's been flute on all the records. I haven't listened. It's possible. Surprises me, and I kind of like it. She's My Queen comes on. Again, lush acoustic guitar chords, man. Beautiful harmonies. And this is not exactly self-serving, but it sounds like a tune that King's X might have recorded. Okay? Now, we know that King's X was a big influence on a lot of bands that came out in this time period. Alice in Chains in particular. Doug was pals with Chris Cornell. There was a connection there. Pearl Jam, Doug played in a band with Jeff Ament, so it's like the King's X influence is felt here. And I don't know if 30 years later they're referring to that, but if you know the King's X song, The Difference, in the Garden of St. Anne's on the Hill, from the Gretchen Goes to Nebraska record, which is just a beautiful acoustic ballad. Not a metal band, gang. Not a metal band. Metal edge, metal influence, funk, soul. They had it all, King's X, man, and they still do. Go listen to The Difference in the Garden of St. Anne's on the Hill. An absolutely beautiful freaking acoustic ballad with those inimitable 3-part King's X harmonies. This tune felt like that to me. And that, my friends, is about as high praise as I can give a tune. And hey, back with the flute solos in that one. And I'm getting into the flute. I'm going to need a flautist. I'm going to need a flautist in my next band. You ever read Bugs Potter? Who is Bugs Potter? Gorman Corman, one of my favorite books of all time. I don't have time to talk about it, but there's a drummer called Bugs Potter and a flautist called Adam, and Bugs perpetually refers to Adam as his flute guy. I need a flute guy or a flute girl in my next band. Then there's a tune called Miles Away. And my reaction to this was, this should be in a Tarantino film. You know, it's this kind of nice, a little bit dark, but kind of nice tune. Again, got a Spanish influence going here. There's like a Spanish flamenco kind of thing happening. And something absolutely horrendous should be happening on the screen. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking ears getting cut off, all right? Something like that should be going on with this tune. It would not surprise me in the least to hear some of these tunes turn up in a Tarantino film. Got that vibe, man. And it's chill and acoustic, but you can sort of interpret it as dark. And you can see it in a Tarantino film with some horrendous thing happening. You Found Yourself While Losing Your Heart is the next tune. And I just had question marks beside this one because it reminds me of something. And I think there's a Sarah Harmer song, actually, that there's a kind of a similar line happening in it. And Sarah Harmer does a lot of sad tunes, man. Sarah Harmer, who is one of my all-time favorites. Still waiting, Sarah. Still waiting for that call. Still working on your new record. Still playing along. Felt like it had something like that going on in it. I like it. More of a traditional band arrangement. All right, there's a backbeat happening on this tune. Give the drummer something to do. And here's another Arcane reference for you, to a certain extent. Back in the 90s, Zakk Wylde released a record called Book of Shadows. You know Zakk Wylde, right? Ozzy's former guitar player. Black Label Society. Heavy stuff, man. Heavy stuff. And Zakk freaking rips, dude. We all know this, okay? But he released this album called Book of Shadows. And everybody said, hey, this is Zakk Wylde solo record. Let's go check it out. And we raised our metal horns and we got prepared to swing our hair around. And then it was like a super chill acoustic album. And it's great. Book of Shadows by Zakk Wylde is a really terrific album. And a few years ago, I saw him play live. He came and did the Zakk show. And he was, I think it was like an anniversary of Book of Shadows, maybe. And so he was basically doing that record. And there's a piano and Zakk's playing piano. And then he's whipping out an acoustic guitar and shredding solos, dude. It was freaking cracked. Nuts. Almost too much. It's like you got hammered over the head for an hour. Like a jackhammer. And it was acoustic. If it was plugged in, I don't know if we would have survived. Book of Shadows is a great record. Go and listen to Zakk Wylde's Book of Shadows. Again, it's a dark acoustic kind of record. Very earnest, very soulful. And this tune, You Found Yourself While Losing Your Heart, seems to me that it could fit on Zakk Wylde's very earnest album, Book of Shadows. I Once Sat at Your Table is a short acoustic instrumental. And it's all about vibe, man. Some keyboard, some strings, just a nice... It's an album! It's an album, kids. We used to have things called albums. It wasn't singles. It wasn't just streaming the latest single on Spotify. There was albums. And the albums had artwork and concepts, and the songs fit together. We have another one here. And the tune, I Once Sat at Your Table, is that. It's a transition song. It's a short, like a minute and a half acoustic piece. Tons of vibe, man, until we get to this tune, Sunburst, that ends the record. And what did I write down? Acoustic song with a backbeat, another more traditional band arrangement. Dreamy tune, and I wrote shoegaze with a question mark. It's one of those get lost in it tunes. And by this point in time, you're like 40 minutes into your bowl. You did the acoustic interlude song. You're flying pretty good, man. You're floating. You're floating around, and then Sunburst comes on. And you can just you just dance in the breeze, man. It's a dreamy sort of shoegazy tune. And the drummer gets to play. There's some toms happening. Yay for the drummer, man. And it fades out at the end. And that's appropriate because by now you're in a trance, man. You're in a trance and you're floating and the tune fades out and you don't even know that it's fading out. You've hit the spot. you've hit where the record wants you to go, which is you smoked your bowl and you're in a trance from this tune and you're just in a good place, man. You're just in a good head space. And here in Covidia, who doesn't want to be in a good head space? Listening applications, smoke a bowl or don't, whatever gets you there. But in the dark headphones, there's a lot of in the dark headphones happening around here. This album takes you there and then this tune kind of just leaves you there. And then you fade away. And then it comes back in with some strings, just this weird little string interlude. And that's movie credits rolling again. Again, it's movie credits rolling. Has there been a band that sat down and said, let's write a record of all songs where you could roll the credits over it at the end of a movie? Because this record feels like that. And then this little string interlude comes in at the very end, and it's like the last shot. It was like the Latin, the Roman numerals for the movie of the year, whatever it is. That last shot at the credits? When you've been watching through the whole movie to see the outtakes and Seth Rogen being goofy, you finally get to the end and that Roman numerals pop up, whatever it is. That warning about all characters being fictions or whatever. This string section is that. And then it's the last shot. And then the lights come up in the theater and it's just you and some dude and maybe a couple people in the corner who are still making out. That's the end of this record for me, So what am I going to say? I'm going to say go listen to the Stone Temple Pilots record Perdida. It's a cool album, man. 70s flavored acoustic rock, a lot of percussion, a lot of vibe, a lot of sounds happening. Super chill, great headphones record, And if you've never given STP a chance, and especially if you're a metal guy, if you can leave the electric guitars and the heavy drums at the door and just approach this as an acoustic record, it's pretty cool, man. It's a cool album, and Ken the Zen did recommend it to me, Before I solicited his advice, he said, there's one record you might want to check out. So I did, because I knew I needed to go into that territory, man. I knew that if I was going to listen to some music over this year that I would not normally listen to, one of the big four of the grunge movement is a place to go. Gotta face those fears, kids, Gotta face them. If there's a place you're afraid to go, that's where you need to go. If there's something you're afraid to confront, that's what you need to confront, man. And you got to believe you are magic. So go and listen to this record. Go listen to Olivia Newton John. I'm going to put some of this on the John Huff Podcast Reference on the Pod playlist, so you can hear some of this music. If you got music you think I ought to check out, if there are records you think I should listen to, do a little bit of a spin with, then please do tell me. And if you're in the mood to do a guy a favor, kids, subscribe to the podcast, please. Go to your Apple, go to Spotify, go to wherever you listen to find podcasts and hit the subscribe button, because it actually helps me and it warms my cockles. And if you could leave a nice review, I would definitely appreciate that too. But enough soliciting. Go smoke a bowl or get a bag of chips or whatever it is that puts you in that kind of ethereal space. Put on your headphones, listen to Stone Temple Pilots Perdida. Go check out Olivia Newton John's Magic. Listen to some Saint. If you want to rock and roll, it's kind of lo-fi metal from the mid-'80s. Saint, Time's End. I'm going to say I hope you're all right, man. I hope you're doing okay. Don't be a serial self-doubter. Believe you are magic, friends. And I'll check you later. Thank you once again, gentle listener, for taking in today's show. If you want to know more about the program, go to www.john-huff.com. That's JOHN-HUFF.com and click on podcast. You can also find the show on Facebook at The John Huff Podcast. If you're an Instagram person, you can find me at JW_Huff. If you're a Twitter person, you can find me at JWSHuff. No matter where you listen to the show, please do me a big, big favor and leave a rating and review. Preferably a positive one. That's all the time we have for today, but I'll be back very soon. Until then, keep your wits about you and remember, Good things happen when you put yourself out there. Bye for now. Primed and ready. The end of time is near.